But tonight we have a special guest. His name is Tom Cilmi. He's a member of the Suffolk County Legislature. How many of you remember what happened at budget time last year? Do you recall that the budget was passed the day after Election Day? Think about that for a change. Actually, I think it was a little bit after midnight, something like that, when they decided. When was that? When did you cast your vote, Tom? Or your negative vote, whatever it was. But in either case, there's been a lot of questions about transparency in the budget process. Budget hearings aren't always as open as they should be. As a matter of fact, I don't even think that you even have to have a public budget hearing. Well, somebody wants to do something about it. It's Tom Cilmi. I want him to come up today to talk about some legislation that he's planning.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all for such a warm welcome. It's nice to be here again. I haven't been here in a while, but it's great to see everybody. I wanted to sort of lay the groundwork and talk to you first a little bit about Suffolk County's budget. You've all read, I'm sure, that Suffolk County has a tremendous budget problem. The question is, how big is the budget problem? And the reason that's a question, for me, is that in the beginning of the year, let's go back. Last year, when the county legislature passes the budget, which happens, as Steve said, after Election Day in November, we pass the budget based on information that the budget that's presented to us is balanced. So we'll start there. Fast forward a couple of months till the beginning of this year, and we learn from our budget review office and the county executive's budget office that Suffolk County is facing a 3-year, $406 million budget deficit. It's not 10 million, it's not 20, it's $406 million. Now, fast forward a month or so later, and the county executive appoints a committee, a task force of private sector individuals, 7 of them, that come into Suffolk County and sort of open the county's books, take a look at things, and come up with their own projections about how bad Suffolk's budget deficit is. Now, mind you, this $406 million deficit that was presented to us by both the county executive's budget office and the county legislature's Office of Budget Review. These are a group of people collectively probably make more than $1.5 million a year. Their only responsibility is to look at the budget, to analyze the budget. So this special task force comes in about a month later and says, no, we think your budget deficit over 3 years is $530 million. So we went in weeks from $406 million to $530 million. A month or two later, our comptroller, Joe Sawicki, who has the responsibility of reviewing these things, looks at 2011's budget numbers. They've already come in, and says, you all were mistaken. The $30 million deficit that you thought existed from 2011 is not $30 million, it's $60 million. Twice as much as what they had thought it was from 2011. So now, the $406 million deficit went to $530 million, and now $560 million. I guess it was about 3 weeks ago, I was reading the Newsday, and we all know, if it's in Newsday, it must be true. So, I'm reading Newsday, and lo and behold, the budget deficit is down to $300 million. So we went from having a balanced budget to a $406 million deficit to a $530 to a $560, and down to a $300 million budget deficit. The numbers have lost all credibility. We are making decisions that are affecting people's lives. We've laid off, 200 plus employees. We're consolidating departments. We're cutting services. We're affecting people's lives. And we're doing it based on what I can only describe as erroneous numbers. I mean, this is not a $10 or $20 million difference, and you can't explain away a $100 or a $200 or a $260 million budget deficit in terms of, well, sales tax revenue came in a little higher than we expected. Because for every % of sales tax revenue, which The county is funded primarily with sales tax revenue. For every percent, it gets us about $11 million. That is one hell of a sales tax revenue increase. So the bottom line is, I don't believe the deficit was ever $400 million to begin with, or $530 million. I think it was lower. It's significant, for sure. And there are some reasons for that. I'm not sure that we'll have time to get into those reasons, but a lot of it, to be fair, is out of the county's control. Nevertheless, we have a situation where we have this budget deficit. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So what are we going to do about it? Here's how the county works in terms of our operating budget. In September, middle of September, the county executive presents to the legislature his proposed operating budget. It's about a $2.7 billion document, which is about 3 inches or so thick. It's a great fun to read. Anyone, you can download it if anyone's not busy tonight during the storm. I would encourage you to go and look. One of the interesting details, by the way, is that we pay about $100 million a year to not-for-profit agencies. Much of that is in the social service realm. In any event, the county executive presents his proposed budget to us in September, middle of September, and our budget review office goes and looks at his proposal and analyzes it, and then at some point comes to the legislature and says, okay, here's what we think about the budget, here's what we think you should do or not do, take out, add in, whatever, based on what we believe to be reality. What the sales tax numbers are actually going to look like, what our Medicaid costs are going to look like, what our pension costs are going to look like. And so then we go about the business of looking at our budget review office's report and coming up with amendments based on those presentations. Here's where it gets a little tricky. Any of us 18 legislators can put together our own budget amendments. But what they do is they assemble a group of 9 legislators. Why 9? There are 18 members of the legislature. Why do they pick 9? Well, if they pick 10, they would violate the open meetings law, and they'd have to have their meetings in public. So instead, they appoint 9, and the members are appointed by the presiding officer. They appoint 9, they put them in the basement of the legislature. They say to the rest of us legislators, you can listen outside the room, but you can't come in the room because then we'll violate the open meetings law. So they put legislators outside the room. They've invited me, and every time I complain about this, they say, well, you can come down and sit outside the room. But so they do this. They assemble this group of people together. They put together what's called an omnibus budget amendment. Does anyone know what an omnibus budget amendment is? Yeah, they take it's an everything but the kitchen sink bill, right? So omnibus budget amendments for the county typically contain a little more than 1,000 line items of changes to the county executive's operating budget. So this group of 9 legislators sits in a basement room. It's literally a basement room in the legislature, behind closed doors, comes up with, they put their own little things in there, whatever they want to do. They come up with this budget amendment, amending 1,000 line items in the county executive's budget. And, you would think that once they're done with it, they'll give it to us. We have several weeks to look at it. Everyone can digest the information, propose some changes or whatever, and we're done, right? That would be the logical thing to do if you're going to accept the basement room meetings. But no. Steve was referring to last year's process. Last year, I and my colleagues received the proposed amendment containing 1,000 line items to the county executive's budget a little after 10 p.m. Election Day night. Now think about this. We're all in a big room celebrating, or not celebrating, depending on who you are. And, I look at my smartphone, and here it is. Here's the amendment, 1,000 line items. We vote on that amendment the following morning at 10 a.m. How is this possible? How is it fair? How is it honest? How is it transparent? It's none of those things, except for possible, because it is what they do. And this is the way they've done things year after year after year after year. So now that I've set the table, what are we going to do about it? I file, well, we have to wait till next November for that, for us. We run every 2 years, next November we run again. I've proposed a series of bills, and on the table in the back, or the table on the side, wherever Judy's put them, you have copies which you can take with you. All right, I call it the Taxpayer Awareness Act. And it's a series of 3 bills. The first bill says very simply, we will vote on the operating budget, which determines your tax levy, whether or not we're raising your taxes. We will vote on that bill the day before, or no later than the day before Election Day, rather than the day after Election Day. Because I think that would be a little more honest with you, don't you think? Do you agree that that would be better, to know how your legislators voted on your taxes prior to actually voting for them or against them? I thought that was it seems to make sense to me. The second piece of legislation says, you know, this 9 members in a basement room doesn't really sit well with me. It doesn't pass the smell test with the voters. It shouldn't sit well with any of those legislators. By the way, I say smell test, I don't really literally mean smell test. It is a small room and it does get kind of heated, but it's not. So anyway, the second bill says that any meetings to determine budget amendments for the county must be held in public. Why not? Why wouldn't you want to have a meeting in public? You all know the answer to that question. It's rhetorical. Okay? So we have a budget committee in the legislature. Give it to the budget committee. These guys are looking at budgetary things all year long. That's the committee that should be looking at the budget amendments and composing these budget amendments in public, with public input, so that, I mean, you know, there are a number of constituencies that get affected by our operating budget, right? I mean, there's taxpayers, first and foremost. There's employees, who are important. There are agencies, not-for-profit agencies, contract agencies that do quite a bit of work for the county. They have some skin in the game. They should have some input as well. And you know, maybe, just maybe, you'd actually craft a budget that way that made some sense and that actually could work for Suffolk County. So that's the second bill. The third bill says that when one of these budget amendments is proposed, it should be proposed at least 5 days prior to voting on the bill. None of this last-minute BS that happens. This way, all of you and all of us on the legislature, all of our employees, all of those contract agencies, everybody, can have a look at the proposed amendment and comment on it and make decisions based on some sense of, you know, understanding, as opposed to the politics that happens now. So those are 3 bills that I proposed. They're all local laws. All local laws are subject to a public hearing process. And here's where all of you come in. So on August 21st, and this is it's on the paperwork that I brought for all of you. On August 21st at 2:30 p.m. in Riverhead, and on September 13th at 2:30 p.m. in Hopog, there will be a public hearing. Now the public hearing we only have to have one public hearing. So it's entirely possible that at the Riverhead public hearing, this will be closed. Typically, the legislature gives some deference to the sponsor of the bills. So if I make a motion to recess the public hearing, which is to say to keep it open, that will happen. So I will make a motion to recess the public hearing in Riverhead so that we'll have a second public hearing in Hopog. And again, that'll be on September 13th, 2:30.